There's so many beautiful patterns that nature provides us to enjoy, and some of the most inspiring ones come from rivers. In this video, we will learn how this intricate beauty is formed and how to recognize rivers in the ancient rock record. As I walk along the top of this 50-million-year-old meandering river, I ponder how very fortunate I am to live near to some of the best exposures of ancient rivers in the world. Why, hello and welcome. In this Ancient Rivers series that I'm doing, I want to focus on the meandering river system. Meandering rivers or windy rivers are very interesting. The Mississippi River is one of those. Small mountain streams and mountain valleys often can be a meandering system. And they're interesting because they can often deposit large sheets of sandstone, unlike the confined channels that we've seen in part of my other series. As you learn to read the rock record, you will observe that these distinctive deposits are indicative of strongly meandering river or fluvial systems. First, I want to show you a cross-sectional view of a channel in a meander river system. So this represents some brush over here, so you make sure you're looking from a cross-section, from a side perspective. The water is flowing down the channel. Here's the water level. The channel is steep-sided over here. That's the cut bank, okay? So we want this river bending, sharp, and cutting into here every time it floods. Or even not. Sometimes it'll cut a little, won't it? But you get a flood going, and man, it can cut significant amounts. Near my house where I have a cut bank, I've seen it cut 20 yards in one major flood. Just cutting back, okay? And here represents the first little sand body, this little wedge here, on the point bar. So this is called the point bar, and of course there's going to be sand and gravels in the bottom here of the channel where the highest flow is. The lighter colored sandy area on the inside of this river bend is the active point bar. So as that cuts, let's do that. A big flood comes along, right? And cuts back here, like so. Okay? Now the new channel bank on this side is over here. Not complicated, right? It's like that. It moves over. And what happens here? Well, it accretes. Lateral accretion. It accretes a new body of sand like this. Okay? And the dips on here are exaggerated. Often we do that when we're sketching geology. It's not that steep, but they're nice dipping beds, okay? Well, what do you think happens if you cut more? It's pretty obvious. I cut more and the process continues, right? I cut more and more and more. And I'm going to cut it back, hypothetically, clear over here, just to help us put in a few of these. Okay, so it cut out the brush here. It's really moved along, huh? Well, it just continued through each flood event, just puts in new sandstone layers and a new channel profile, okay? Moving along. And this can build a nice body of sand that's this thick in this schematic. This is a great example of these dipping beds or lateral accretion surfaces on a point bar. Let's start with the channel early in its life, okay? The cut bank, to orient ourselves, is out in the air here. We don't see the actual bank. It's out beyond just a bit. The river was going around a big bend, okay? So with the cut bank over there, the point bar was right where I'm standing here. So let's start with the lower one. This is when the river first started here. The first point bar in the river, right here at the bottom. Then a flood came in, or floods. This is probably a series of them here, but it might even be one. Came in and accreted on another big body of sand on this accretion surface on the front of the point bar. So if I would have been here on the river, I could have walked right down this top of this point bar. That's where the water was, just to try to visualize that. And so on through time, accreting on out, okay? And then eventually the river jumped to another location or avulsed. I want to make a couple more points using the sketchboard. At the bottom of the river, of course, is higher energy, and therefore you leave lag deposits, we call them, which are coarser grained. And I've depicted that along here in the sketch, these coarser deposits. And also the point bar deposits often leave little ridges along the top that I've depicted here. These are referred to as scroll bars. And in map view, they tend to have a nice arc shape. Let's use a perspective view to help us understand the three-dimensional geometries. This is the flood stage of the river that I'm showing here, and this is important because it's during the flood stage that you actually accrete on new sand bodies on the point bar that we've talked about. Notice that the scroll bars conform to the shape of the river, so they have that nice arc shape. I like to say that they wrap around the inside corners of the river. So the point bars wrap around the inside bend of the river, and importantly, they dip down towards the cut bank or the deep part of the river. I want you to notice that the slopes or dips of these point bars alternate. So here in the front point bar we're looking at, it slopes to the left. But yet on the next bend, of course, it flips and slopes down to the right. These arrows show the dip or slope direction of each point bar alternating along the river path. Ephemeral streams are a great place to see point bars. I'm walking right along the point bar. And I'm standing right on the point bar, okay? And notice that it's dipping down like this. Now some rivers, the dips are a little steeper and some are shallow like this. And it's a big bar that wraps around the corner. I'm walking along out here in this beautiful painted desert and I see the perfect example of a miniature point bar. It's just beautiful. See this dipping surface that goes right into the cut bank under here? It's gorgeous and it makes this really tight corner. So the water is flowing around this way. Let's come around here and take a look at this as it comes right around the corner. Right around. So nice as it comes around the corner. With these ripples, very subtle, parallel to the point bar right here. Really gorgeous. These amazing images are referred to as LiDAR images and are made by using lasers to create a super high definition data set of the topography or elevation changes of the land surface. Let's zoom in and take a look at point bar deposits. Wow, this is just amazing because you can actually see all the scroll bars deposited by this river. If we focus just on this one turn in the river, we see how these scroll bars describe the history, the shape of the river through time. It's really fun to think about and look at the other scroll bars in this image to wonder about the history of this river. If you colorize the LiDAR data, you reveal such beauty. It's a work of art in a way, isn't it? But also it gives us a lot of science and a lot of information because in fact, again, you're seeing the history of the river right in front of you. Let's examine this bend in the present-day river right here. These faint lines through this area are of course the scroll bars, which represent point bar deposits of the past. The darker shades back in here are the oldest point bar deposits that we can see, and they progressively get lighter in color and younger until you get to the modern river. I'll tell you what, I could look at these images for hours. They're so fascinating and beautiful at the same time. Here is a wonderful example of point bar deposits and scroll bars along the Porcupine River in Alaska. I think it's time to go look at the ancient rocks. These are from the 50 million year old Eocene age Willwood Formation. Do you see anything on this hillside that catches your eye? Let me help you out a bit. Let's zoom into this area. As a geologist, I just can't tell you how amazing this outcrop is. We don't get the chance to see such beautiful outcrops everywhere we go, but this is one of them. I hope you're seeing features that I showed you on my sketchboard. Now this is going to be fun because we're going to see how well you did with your observations. Let's start with the erosional base or scour of the actual channel that we can see here. Now what about the top of the channel system? Do you think you can see it? Now that we've identified the envelope of the system, let's focus on the interior features. Here is one of several point bar deposits within this system. Using the principles we've learned, we can now estimate where the final cut bank was, where it was just before the river jumped to a new location or avulsed. Remember that this river was cutting or migrating to the left, adding point bar deposits through time, and that the cut bank also was cutting progressively to the left. Here's another nice example of point bar deposits. And another fine example of these dipping, laterally accreted sand bodies. But one thing you can certainly count on in geology is that things get complex. In red is the envelope of a relatively young river system that has cut or truncated an older river system that I've highlighted in black. As I drive through the Badlands, I try to visualize all the ancient rivers that created these beautiful hills, and I think about the ecosystem at the time. I'm excited to take you to the next rock exposure. It is so very rare. It allows us to see in 3 dimensions a river that is 50 million years old. Even with great outcrops, visualizing the 3-dimensional nature of them can be tricky, so I want to return to this sketch to help us with a couple concepts that we'll be seeing in the rock. Remember that the point bar deposits slope downwards towards the channel or the cut bank, and that the deposits wrap around the corner in the shape of the river on the inside bends. Also remember that the slope of these point bar deposits flips from one direction to the other on each curve of the river as you go down the river. This whole channel has been weathered out and it's leaving the bends of the river in with the lateral accretion surfaces and the point bars largely intact or intact enough to see, okay? So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I look at this surface right here, it's going around the corner. So this sandstone body or point bar wraps around the corner and dips downward towards the channel or cut bank. Right here. And another cool one is this one. This is, as near as I can tell, is the very last bar that the river deposited. Okay? So here it is. And you can see it goes kind of around here. It's eroded away there, but here's the front of it right here. This upper point bar, or the youngest one, is heavily eroded, but one can still see enough information to put the picture together. At one time, before the erosion, it was a nice continuous sand body that wrapped around the corner. It's eroded away where I am, but here's the front of it. Wow. And the river, where was the river at the time I put this last bar in? Well, this was deep water at the time. This is where the deep water was. Now I want to show you what it looks like right down the plunge of a point bar. Look at this. Here's one. There's one here. There's this one. There's this one. Oh, wow. And it just wraps around. Wraps around. And then you have this big guy here, the final one. I'll tell you what, geology just doesn't get any better than this. Looking from above, we can clearly see many sand bodies accreted on the point bar through time. Following the ancient river, we see the point bars dipping to the left. And as we go along, now we see that they have switched and are dipping back to the right. Along this section, it's not as obvious to see, so let's move forward. Here we see sandbars dipping to the right. And now, back to the left. Well, you've heard me talk about how the rivers jump to new locations. It's a process we call avulsion. And you might wonder, well, how does that happen or why does it happen? And I wanted to get into that just a minute so we understand that. I have depicted here in cross-sectional view a river system here with my tree here, okay? And it is recently cut in a channel and has some water flowing in it. If you think to when you stand on the bank of a river, where does the high velocity occur? The high velocities of the river occur in the deepest part of the channel or within the channel. And that's true in flood stage too. If the water gets up high and bursts the banks, the highest velocity is always going to be right in the core of that channel. But there's an interesting thing that happens when the flooding occurs. So let me draw that here. The water comes up out over the banks, out here to the trees, out in here. Now, we have high velocity waters during flood stage that are carrying all kinds of sand grains, coarser grains, mud, everything, right? The mud, everything, right in the core, where it has enough energy to carry even the larger particles in the system, which in these systems tends to be maybe, say, coarse grain sand. So during flooding, as the water rises up over the lip here, the speed or the velocity of the water drops dramatically. And that means all the particles, primarily sand in this case, drop out of suspension. They're entrained in the water, but when the velocities drop, they just drop. Drop right to the floor, wherever that is. And here, it happens to be here in this area. Right here. Okay. And this happens over and over again, and it builds what we call levees. These are called levees. So I'm going to make it kind of dramatic here. Right, like this. And we build these nice levees of sand. And interestingly, in an aggrading system where the river is filling in sediment in a basin, like in the Bighorn Basin, like where we've been looking here in the Willwood Formation, then the bottom of the channel also keeps rising along too, like this. Up and up the bottom. And the levees get taller and taller and bigger and taller. At some point, this creates a very unstable situation because now the bottom of the river is very close to the floodplain level. And in fact, there are cases where it gets above the floodplain, the bottom of the river. because it's continually grading. These levees are building up. So let me put normal water flow right here. That's above the floodplain out here. And so, of course, the river wants to go out there. So you have a flood come along and breach the levee during flood stage, and the river says, hey, I'm going to go over here where it's lower. And so you have the river jump to a new location. Sometimes it's a short place, sometimes, or for a short section, I mean, and other times the entire river jumps to a new location. So looking down from above in map view, I've sketched the river here. The river often moves around in fairly close areas to the main channel. It'll break through to a new area and proceed on. But sometimes it does a big jump. It might break loose here, out of here, and come out into the floodplain and go off over here, like this, over a long stretch of the river. So you have the full range of things that can occur. Let's return to modern rivers and learn a bit more. Going to the Ucayali River of Peru, which is a major tributary of the Amazon, we can learn more about these meandering systems. One thing I want to mention about these meandering fluvial systems is that they are low gradient, meaning the slope is very low, and they have finer particles that are transported. Fine-grained sand is pretty typical, for instance, and can have a lot of mud as well. Let me highlight the river path from this image in 1987, and then we'll watch how it changes through time. Here it is in 1991. Notice this tiny little channel right here. So just 1 year later, in 1993, we see the entire river has taken the path of that small channel. We call that a chute cutoff because it cut off the big meander loop. Just 3 years later, in 1996, we see another example of a small channel which will become a chute cutoff. In 1997, much of the river was following this cutoff, and by the year 2000, the entire river was flowing down that cutoff. Jumping to the year 2020, we see just how much the river has changed in a mere 33 years. Wow. So here we are at the Porcupine River in Alaska. Wow, what a lot of ancient scars from the river you can see in here. These horseshoe-shaped lakes, or oxbow-shaped lakes, are called oxbow lakes. In 1944, a geologist by the name of Harold Fiske published a series of 15 beautiful maps which show all the ancient channels of the Mississippi River. This stunning LiDAR image of the Pack River teaches us an important concept, and that is that meandering rivers tend to be confined to a belt. The meander belt that we're observing is completely dominated by sand. Therefore, what we often see are sheets or blankets of sandstone, and isolated meander river channels are not too common. Here is a nice example of a sheet sand that formed within a meander belt that I've highlighted in red. It is Eocene age, which is about 50 million years old. Looking at this sheet sandstone, it's important to remember the effects of erosion. At one time, there were thousands of feet of sedimentary rocks over the top of this system. Only recently has erosion revealed part of this blanket sandstone, and some of it has been eroded away. I put these white lines to show where it has been removed by erosion. And now to an astounding outcrop of rock in Utah. This is Jurassic Age Morrison Formation. Many dinosaurs wandered this land here, and in fact many bones come out of this very sandstone. How many different rivers can you see that have made up this sheet sandstone? It's amazing to think about, isn't it? Hiking these desolate yet beautiful badlands gives me so much opportunity to wonder about Earth's long history and our place in it. Well, this has been a lot of fun for me, and I hope you're getting better at reading the book of Earth's history by watching these videos. Thank you for watching.